Okay, so just some random questions first that I've been thinking about. So have you heard of this trade-off viewpoint in morality where you like, it's this idea that you weigh a principle against a value. So like, for example, I want money. And so the principle is, let's say, the best way to get money is to be productive and not to initiate force. That's in your long-term interest. That would be the principle, right? But the money is a value. And so the trade-off viewpoint to morality is like, okay, well, I could get this money by you doing fraud, by doing something fraudulent. And so can I
Yes.
weigh the value of following the principle of not initiating violence against this value that is the money? That's my understanding of the trade-off viewpoint, right?
Yeah, that would sound like consequentialism, where you're just
Ah,
measuring the outcome.
right.
Like you're just weighing outcomes. Utilitarianism is another way to look
In
at
this
that.
case, are you also weighing the outcomes against the principles? It's like you recognize the principles have some importance, but you're not, you are weighing them up in different situations. I'll give you an example
Yeah,
actually from fiction. Is that consequentialism too?
I wouldn't say necessarily. If you're trying to combine both, consider the consequences, consider the principles, try to fit as a way to part of the process of figuring out the way it affects your life, trying to integrate into man's nature, broadly speaking. How does that affect the type of life you live? Not just merely do you acquire what you want, but the process of living, does that change too? Which isn't a consequence per se. That's like the process, looking at the
Okay.
methods of living and trying to integrate both consequences and the nature of man into one. And you
Okay.
do need to consider consequences, but it's not, you don't weigh values merely by consequences. It's part of the consideration, part of the analysis.
Right. So would you say, so then what else would be, like, what else would you call the trade-off viewpoint in morality then, if it's not fully consequentialism? Because it's like this passage probably. So this guy is
Well,
a
where did you
honest.
get the term trade-off in this case?
Oh, I got it from Opa.
Oh, I see. Yeah, then the way you just integrating both sounds fair as a way to think of trade-off then. Or at least trade-off is like, was he saying it this was a good method or is an example of some way of thinking?
I can find you the full quote
Yeah.
if you want. Moment. Ah, there we go. Okay, let me just quickly paste this. I think it was this one.
Yeah, rejects the viewpoint. Rejects trade-off. That's what I thought.
Right. But it's like whatever this viewpoint he's referring to, it seems to give
Yes.
a nod to principles on some level. And
Yeah, I
then
would agree.
but there's no philosophical viewpoint. There's no name for this philosophically. It's just maybe pragmatism, right? A kind of
Yeah,
mixing and
it's
matching of.
not a common way of phrasing things, but I would call it a type of consequentialism or
Okay.
perhaps pragmatism
Right.
or both, depending on the
Right.
philosopher.
Right. Or consequentialism might be, like I think if you're speaking, if I'm right, if you're thinking of a philosophical viewpoint, then that's going to be consistent. Whereas this might be, because it's not a philosophical viewpoint, it's going to be inconsistent. It's going to be basically, or it reduces to pragmatism.
Yeah, whatever this is, I think Picasso's saying is it reduces to something more pragmatic, just
Right.
It's like he's suggesting that to do this would be to think of these values without context. That you're just weighing out the particular value. You're not looking at the context by which it is a value. I mean, it is a value in the sense that even the principles are what make it a certain kind of value. That it wouldn't be a value without that principle in mind, that they imply each other.
Right. And I found, I actually found a concrete, I think it's a concrete example of this from Shantaram, which is this quote here.
Yeah. And he's saying the bad, why it's bad for our way of thinking. It drives us under the great wheel, like a cog in the machine. That's what it makes you into.
Oh, wow. I didn't know what that meant. Okay. So it makes you a cog in the machine. Oh,
That's
cool.
how I interpret it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I never focused on that. Yeah. So this is probably more common to someone who's not thinking philosophically because they're not, they might not care about consistency, but okay, that's cool.
Yeah, you could say, oh, I could get $1 million, or I could do this. I could act consistently or get $1 million. And
Right.
that'd be a way of thinking of the trade-off view. Like you could either keep principles or get rid of them and get rich.
Or you
That's
can
like
keep them some of the time, right? Like
yeah, or that.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there. So would you say then? I was thinking about this. Would you say I'm right in, I don't know, defining or characterizing this as a violation of the hierarchy of principles? That's a bit of a mouthful, but do you remember I did the Art of Thinking course, and he talks about how you can't compare two different things on a different level of a hierarchy, just like I can't compare rat to animal. I have to compare rat to bird or something on the same level. Is this the same thing where you're taking a value and you're comparing it to a principle, or you're putting it on the table and you're saying it's on the same level of a hierarchy?
It could be. I never really thought of it that way, but you could say the person is taking concrete values and equating them with values on a more abstract level, as if you can compare honesty with having money. Like they're different levels of abstraction. They're not really the same comparison. And that could be a way of where it leads you astray by using the trade-off principle. Could lead you to compare, like, say, having a car versus leading an honest life. I mean, those are very different considerations and not mutually exclusive either.
Right. So then it is what he's talking about. That's cool. It's this violation of the hierarchy of principle, or the principle of hierarchy. It violates the principle of hierarchy. I think it's actually, I got it the wrong way around. It's the violation of the principle of hierarchy. Yeah. Cool. That's an example of it then.
Or like when Francisco said, like, you think money is the root of all evil. Well, what use it's not money that's the problem. It's like a lack of productivity, or maybe that's not a great example, but he was saying the love of money. He was trying to argue against that as the true evil. Like what would actually be bad is not at that level merely of those concrete values. To be something, if anything was wrong, it would be at a more abstract level about like productivity or the meaning of the mind.
Right. Yeah, because I remember he gives the example that money is a tool. So it's a tool specifically, and then he goes into more after that. Okay. In the OPAR as well, it says that, so it makes distinctions between different kinds of honesty. So there's well, I don't know if it's different kinds of honesty, but maybe forms of honesty. You'll tell me once I write it down. I think maybe you'll know. So there's honesty in your motivation. There's
Yeah.
honesty in method, and there's honesty in content, and they all refer to different parts or aspects of honesty. And so
Yes.
As an example, method might be integration, like constantly seeking out to correct contradictions. That might be method.
Yeah.
And then, so where I was interested in motivation. So it was something like this: seeking knowledge. So for motivation, it was seeking knowledge because one needs it to act properly. That should be your motivation for seeking knowledge, as opposed to, let's say, seeking knowledge to be able to hold yourself in some intellectual discussion.
Yeah. That'd be second-handed. But yeah, good
Right.
example.
So my question about this is, what about intending to practice any idea as true? What about, Aristotle didn't necessarily see or know the connection between the knowledge he was acquiring and its practical application to living. Am I right in saying that? Not all of it, at least.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he knew he was setting out on a big project and always knew he had more to learn, I think. So I think that'd be fair.
And then you have sometimes areas of research in the sciences, like I think in cosmology, where there's definitely no clear application to the thing you're studying. There's no, you cannot see, okay, what I'm learning about now will help me act properly.
Yeah.
And so how does this apply to those fields? Because, or how do you think about that? Like, because there are fields where I assume the people who are pursuing study in, let's say, cosmology, where they don't know if there's application, that it's just a pure fascinate, or I don't want to say pure fascination in and of itself, because that can't be right. But it's something other than a desire to act properly. But then it doesn't seem fair to say that that's dishonest. There's something off about that.
Need to act properly. Yeah, that would be a reason maybe to modify this definition, because I think you're right to say that if you're studying cosmology, it's very abstracted away from humanity. Although it's more like questioning what's the point of scientific knowledge if all it does is make you more precise about something. It expands your knowledge about something, not just first getting a concept, but expanding on it, which it might not have any direct application. I guess it's a matter of in what way you integrate the pursuit of knowledge in general. I mean, we wouldn't want to pursue it merely as a detached platonic thing that because of its purity or something. Trying to think how to even answer that well.
Maybe you're right. Maybe the definition needs it needs some tailoring or application to this example, because you go wrong if you. I feel like you go wrong if you say Aristotle was dishonest based on this definition.
Yeah, I mean, he studied cosmology. He was very wrong about it too, but he tried to be very careful about his inquiry, despite being very wrong. And he thought the planets were eternal and always existed and went around the Earth in a circle. No, was it heliocentric? I don't remember if he believed in heliocentrism or not, but he did think this planets were eternal and were always in a position. And he pursued that knowledge, but it wasn't really as an aspect of metaphysics. It wasn't as a matter of finding out the true constituents of reality. It's more about the way the the eternal constituents operate. He wasn't looking at some necessarily some ethical principle. But I guess it's a matter of integrating acting properly with possessing greater knowledge in general. In what way does knowing more about reality influence or impact proper action and proper
Right.
functioning? And is it
Right.
part of the fullest extent of living by your nature, which would also be acting properly? Does acquiring a lot of knowledge imply, or a part of the proper nature of man? That's the hard part, though. In what
Right.
way does it come to bear in a practical way? And I know that's more very abstract, and probably the hardest thing to justify ethically, but as long as it's not detached from reality, at least it would be honest and not trying to divorce cognition from reality.
I suppose you could say, if we know, well, at least now we know, if we expand our knowledge, there is a point you do get to, and it may not be in your lifetime, where discoveries in your field may lead to discoveries in another that do have significant practical consequences. But it's a different conversation, I think. So
Yeah.
Okay. So do you remember my post about the benevolent universe and trying to get my head
Yes.
around that? So I also put this up on the the HB forum, and he replied. Actually, he added something that was helpful, which is we live in a limited, like a finite universe, meaning when we discover threats, we categorize them, and we can deal with them effectively in the future, and that's why there aren't all these,
Mhm.
bad things, we perceive bad things happening and so on. And so I got a question about that. Let's see I'll see if I can find. Actually, maybe I'll let you read this and take your time, and then we can just
Yeah.
discuss this. So this blue stuff was he just responded to that below, which is here.
That's kind of okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here I found interesting. So my question apparently is in reverse, which I was trying to get my head around. Like, okay, I looked at this and I said, there's not all these what I call unanticipated asteroids or unknown diseases. And he's saying that's reverse, as in I'm asking the question in reverse, which I'm trying to get my head around. Like, it's not a fit between my mind and the universe. It's a fit between life and the conditions hospitable to life. What exactly is the difference? Is he saying that it's not because of my mind, but it's because the universe, like I'm getting it wrong to say, yeah, I'm not really clear. Like, to me, it seems like the same thing, a fit between life and conditions hospitable to life, and saying a fit between my mind and the universe, although mind and universe seems a bit abstract.
Yeah, I don't know why mind would be relevant there. I mean, I can see why seeing a fit between life and the universe, that would
Right.
make sense. I'm not sure what he's saying is reverse. I mean, it just sounds like he just was pointing out that it's not about just the way you perceive the way the universe is, the way you think of or conceive of the way the reality is, but
Right.
rather what the fit itself with the facts of life, how those
Right.
are related to the conditions for life, but the conditions possible to life are implied by the nature of reality itself. I mean, they follow from reality. So in that sense, you could say it is the same as the universe. I mean, after all, we're talking about the benevolent universe present that premise. So it makes sense that we would still be talking about some connection with the universe itself, the totality of existence.
On this latter part about categorizing threats, I followed. So you categorize threats and there's a type of threat. And so, for example, animals can be dangerous. So if you do encounter some animal you're not familiar with, then you can exercise caution and, be careful or not come too close immediately until you get a better idea of how this animal behaves and so on. So that makes sense. But what does he mean, a new type of threat? Like, okay, for us to really have something unanticipated, you not only need a new type of threat, but you need a new type of type. What is that? I don't even know what he's talking about.
I mean, it just sounds like you can expand on what you know. That seems to be all he's saying. You could have additional versions. You can make further differentiation. Seems like that's all he meant.
Okay.
Although I think I disagree with him that this is what the benevolent universe present premise is about. I mean, I get what he's saying, but I don't think that's what Rand meant by it. I don't disagree with what he's saying. Just like I think this is a different topic. I guess there is disagreement what exactly is the benevolent universe premise. Rand doesn't say that much about it.
Yeah.
But it does make sense. So I think there's two ways to interpret it. And this is one way. I take the more, what I describe as like that aesthetic look. I think I mentioned to you, aesthetic abstraction. But
Yeah,
I'm not
although
sure
you
if,
could say the aesthetic abstraction is derived from a particular concept, or it can be derived from a particular conceptual
right,
viewpoint, or it's implicit because you've just,
right.
you could translate it into words, but it's implicit. So I was trying
Yeah,
to get at it from the conceptual direction.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure which is right, but as far as what Binswanger is arguing, it makes sense to me. And I think just the types of threats, just as you learn more, you make further distinctions.
What are your thoughts on, okay, we're saying there's a fit between life and the conditions hospitable to
Yeah,
life. That's now
yeah,
in this industrial civilization. But
yeah.
what if I lived in Europe in 724 AD, and I had 4 kids and 3 of them died. Like, is that still, like, how do I, what I'm saying when I'm thinking about it
Yeah.
on this abstract level? How do you, would it be still right for me to say that there's a fit between life and the conditions hospitable to life? Because it's just harder to, when I'm looking at the facts on the ground in that context, I don't know, like, how do you conclude that?
It seems like the only thing you could do is say mankind isn't extinct, therefore the conditions must be hospitable. I mean, if not all men are dead, then clearly it's hospitable to some men. But if most men live and some die, then it would seem to suggest that the conditions are generally hospitable. You might not be able to make a strong case, but I don't think it's like
Right.
that's why it doesn't seem always strong enough to me to say just that. Life is generally hospitable. I mean, yeah, but sometimes in your particular context, it could be such a dismal place in particular that it isn't hospitable at all.
Totally.
What do you say?
So, yeah, so that's interesting. I don't know how to, it goes back to, do you think about it then statistically? It doesn't make sense to go, oh, well, most men survive. I don't know if it makes sense to say most men survive. So, like, Oh, my 3 kids died, but 1 lived. So the universe
Yeah.
is hospitable. It's I don't know how to think about that, but
But then somebody might ask, like, it's hospitable, but to me, it is not. Which is at least, I just meant like it's at least closer to the benevolent universe premise to say that reality is generally hospitable to most men. So at least that's why the universe isn't out to get mankind in general, but they might see like, oh, it's out to get me. Everyone else has it good but me. That would be contrary to the benevolent universe premise.
right. Okay, maybe we can revisit that in the future. You know that quote by who? Life is brutish and short. What's his name?
Hobbes.
Yes. Yeah. I think about that sometimes, like depending on the context you're in, what would be a good way to reach conclusions, and like what errors would someone like that make if they did make errors, and then how do you make sure you don't make those errors given your unique circumstances? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Have you heard of the inventory of the philosophers categories? I don't know if
Well,
that's what Peikoff calls it.
yeah. Yeah, I think Aristotle would just call it categories.
Okay, the categories.
Yeah.
Is there a concept for these categories, or do you just call them categories? That's what the concept is?
Well,
So
Aristotle
all these,
called it just called them categories.
right?
I don't
Categories
know
of
about others.
being or categories of.
I had to look it up. I'll look it up later, but one of the two. I can check
Okay.
really quick, actually.
Okay, cool.
Categories. Yeah, I just read it the other week.
Yep, you told me. I remember.
Categories. Aristotle. Let's see. Here we go. Aristotle. Let's see. Stanford Encyclopedia. What did he call it? I'll define it later.
Yeah, it's okay. I found okay, so I know Aristotle wrote about this, and so it's probably from him.
Yeah.
Okay. In what way would you say philosophy is a skill? Like, is it a skill in terms of moral applications, or what is philosophy a skill, or it's a science? Well, it is a science. It's a science, but then in what way is it a skill? If it
Thinking
is
in
one.
essentials, I think.
Okay. Right.
Which is a skill and has very much practical application.
Right.
And I think a lot of philosophers probably realize that, but they may have not emphasized it.
Right. Thinking in essentials and in principles.
Yeah, that seems more objectivist specifically.
Right.
And that's why I like it, because I find it very practical and true and helpful in practical ways.
Okay. So the skill of philosophy is in thinking. That would be
breaking it down to essentials, to the basic ideas without getting bogged down in the details.
right.
I mean, the details are good sometimes, but being good at philosophy, to be able to sort through it, to swim through the mess, so to speak.
In people you know who are very good at philosophy, in their understanding, but also in the application, what are there any typical ways you've seen them approach studying it?
I'm trying to think of people that I know like that. I don't really know enough people that really I think are good at philosophy. Like I know people who are honest about their approach and all that. But to say that they've achieved mastery, I don't know anybody like that.
Okay.
Except maybe certain philosophers I respect from the past, but nobody alive that I know.
Right.
Firsthand, that is.
Is it, if I want to think about values in terms of kinds of values, where do I begin? Like, what's a way to start breaking down or answering a question of what kinds of values are there?
I mean, of course, there's a more didactic way, just finding what other people have said. Wait, do you mean like finding out for yourself, or
Both. Does it make sense for me to think about them in terms of, okay, so there's romantic value, there is work value or productive, like I know these are general big categories, like there's, that, okay, well, maybe we'll simplify the language here, we'll just go work, love, friendship, and play, something like that. Like I've seen all these breakdowns, but does it if I'm trying to think about values in terms of their types or categories, is this how I approach it? Okay, these are the kinds of things people generally pursue, so these are the kinds of values that one can pursue in life. Is that the kind of approach that one should, like, is a good way to take to start conceptualizing the different kinds of values?
I think on the one end, you should take a general inventory of your values and the way you think of them, at least to look at the way you are organizing them for now. Like, is there a way that you unify certain types of values, even if value is simplistic or whatever you think works? I mean, it's not, to some extent, you've probably organized your values a little bit. And I think you could write it down if you wanted to get explicit about it, or at least say them out loud. And then you could figure out which ones seem to be relevant. And you could say, compare that to what other philosophers have done.
Right.
Or you could break it down further and maybe use some concepts, just some concepts other philosophers have used, like in what way, what about work? I mean, are there ways to split that up? Is that unified with something else?
Yeah,
Can you
okay.
categorize it differently?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Like to be honest, some of these I found in self-help books. They make sense because they do
Yeah.
seem to capture a lot of what people pursue, right? But I was curious if there's much more, because if you take someone who's like a 1 in a billion intelligence, maybe they can find more fine detail that helps you think about the things you're pursuing. That's what sort of what I was getting at. Like even this idea of defense value, which I don't fully get, but like that would be an example of like, okay, so there may be more things that you're doing that actually do not sit in this simple these simple distinctions. And so I was trying to find, like, can I take a complete inventory of different kinds of values and get better at identifying them? That's what I was getting at. It just sounds like the answer is okay, obviously introspection gets you to a certain point, but then if you're not a Nietzsche or a Aristotle or a Ayn Rand, like maybe the answer is you just need to read philosophy. There's nothing more.
Sometimes that is the case.
Yeah.
Like, but I mean, I know some Aristotle even just categories, not even saying anything complicated. I mean, he's just showing the way of thinking about categorizing in general anyway. He talks about like concretes, quantities, qualities, location, time, relationship, being affected by or affecting other things. And those are ways to think about particulars and certain concepts. And that's the way to start thinking about what is what and just distinguishing things. But then distinguishing is sometimes a matter of in what way is it unifying something relevant or something that comes up a lot. Like you could look at, say, once you were distinguishing between particulars versus qualities, say, like maybe you could say love is a quality, but not a concrete. And that's the way to start thinking, maybe I mean, try to make sure that you're categorizing or thinking of things correctly or consistently, and looking at relationships. Like, is friendship a relationship between two things? So it's not necessarily itself the value, but a relationship between values. I mean,
Right.
that's the way
Right.
you could start thinking. So of course it gets complicated, but I think it's always better to start with at least what you think is true. Then you could look at it like, oh, does this make any sense? Just making it explicit help me notice something I'm doing wrong, or
Mm.
maybe I'm doing something right.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at, because if I think you can think better if you can make more accurate distinctions in what you're pursuing, because then you end up doing things. It's easy to end up doing something which you've justified by some kind of line of thought that isn't that great.
Yeah. That's why I think it's then important to compare with other thinkers. And that's the value of like reading about philosophy, because then you can at least make the comparisons.
Right.
How does what I say different than what Aristotle says? Is
Yes.
Aristotle wrong or am I wrong? Usually Aristotle would be the one that's right, but he's not always right. So usually you can say like, oh, I can see where I'm going wrong.
Right. Would you say
You don't have
that?
to don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that's exactly what I don't want to. Well, one, to be honest, or not to be honest, it's just the truth. I can't reinvent the wheel. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I read about Nietzsche, and he became a professor at 25.
Yes.
Right? He was so good that they didn't even need him
Give
to
him a
write a
test.
dissertation, which was
Yes.
really unusual at that time.
Yeah.
So learn, if you're smart, then you should be learning what you like. Learn, yeah, of course, make observations in your own life, but
Yeah.
learn as much as you can from these people. That just seems
Yeah.
to be the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And would you say that one synonym on value is meaning? Because I've seen, there's a book by School of Life, and it's called The Meaning of Life, and in it they list the book is divided up into sources of meaning and obstacles to meaning. And sources of meaning, which they list, are let me just love, family, work, friendship, culture, politics, nature. So there's a few more here beyond the ones that I just gave, but they also, would you say when people speak of meaning, they often speak of value?
Yes, I guess meaning is a type of value. I think that would make sense. But not all value is necessarily something meaningful. Like it's a value to eat, like, I don't know, a piece of chocolate sometimes, but it's not that meaningful to me, maybe a little bit, but not
Right.
as
Okay.
meaningful as, say, reading a book by Ayn Rand. Like that's a
Right.
different level of value. Like
Okay.
I'm not being philosophical about that definition. I'm just talking about like how people usually use the term. And it seems like a fair use of it.
Right.
Not trying to get like, is it meaning of value? Like some kind of value.
Okay. This is I don't know how good this question is, but if I want to think about kinds of people, do you think that makes sense? Because in Ayn Rand's conception of, in her view of sense of life, she does see it as something unique and irreplaceable. So if I think from that perspective, or at least my understanding of that perspective, then there is no kinds of people, really. There are just unique individuals. But then I remember when I went through something, Peikoff was talking about literature and how it's like a menu, like it's like you go into a restaurant and you get a menu of all these different characters, and you get to select, oh, I don't want to be this character, I don't want to be that one, I want to be closer to this character. Like thinking about the kinds of people, do you think it's useful to make broad distinctions, or there are people who've made useful broad distinctions about kinds of people?
Yeah. I mean, I think Rand is good at that, but
Right.
and I think if you'd have Rand hated everything about Nietzsche and just like to criticize him like about everything, I think she even misinterpreted him. So it's the one thing you can say she took from him is this use of types of people, like whatever metaphor she used, like Attila, the witch doctor, or
Right.
even the characters in her books, or whatever term you think of, a parasite, a moocher, a hero. I mean, she's not saying that people always fit into some perfect Platonic ideal, but that there is a general way of categorizing people. Nietzsche wouldn't say you could do that epistemologically, but his style of writing did make use of it to make
Right.
points like, you know, Apollo, Dionysus, the last men. He says throughout different things, philosophers of the future,
Right.
things like that.
Okay. They're all fairly big integrations. Like if I speak of
Yes.
an Attila, like in day-to-day life, I'm not able to perceive an Attila.
Yes.
So it's okay. So it just seems like Ayn Rand, Nietzsche, philosophy and literature, but I haven't really been able to find types. I've only been able to find elements of a character in another person, basically.
I think Rand used it primarily as a literary device. I don't know if she's usually making a claim about the nature of reality as much as aesthetically, it serves a role for cognition to do this as well. Not only is it jarring and startling for the reader, but you retain abstractions better with these categories of people.
Yes. Okay.